I can still see myself like shifting through all the stuff in my closet, this little closet in my dorm room, thinking, what in the world am I going to wear to my mom's funeral? Like, I have to make this choice right here and right now. I get on that plane, I get home to Virginia. All I wanted to do was run and jump in my dad's arms. I just knew that he would at least make everything okay. I knew that he would be the one to console me and to help us navigate these next steps. Without my mom, we get in the car and we start driving, and I said, I just want to see my dad. When I said that, my uncle turns and looks at him, my cousin sitting in the passenger seat, and then pulls the car over, and he turns around and he looks at me and says, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away too.
Substance use disorder touches all our lives, and often we feel hopeless or frustrated in our pursuit to understand how and why it happens.
Welcome to APC Recovery Cafe, where we discuss the topics and trends around substance use, provide education and resources, offer recovery support, and also discuss prevention tactics, all through the stories of the people who have been there.
We invite you to grab your favorite coffee or tea and join us for a variety of guests that will bring understanding, information, connection, and hope.
Together, we can break the stigma and pave a brighter future for each other.
Welcome everybody into this edition of the APC Recovery Cafe. I'm Art Wimberly. I'm one of your co-hosts and a person grateful to be in long-term recovery and a volunteer at the Addiction Prevention Coalition. And I want to introduce my co-host for today, Carrie Wimberly. Carrie?
Hello.
Hey.
Glad to be here.
Now, will you introduce our guest for us today?
I'll be happy to. Today, we welcome Lauren Sisler in with us. And Lauren wears a lot of hats. She's actually on our board, which we're so grateful for. But she's also a reporter, sports broadcaster. What's the official title?
We can say sports broadcaster, sports reporter, sideline reporter.
For ESPN.
Yep.
Has been for AL.com. I know you've made a shift.
Yep.
We can talk about that
Still
a little
working
bit.
as a contributor for them, so doing some videos for Alabama and Auburn football coverage.
Okay. And then you also have your own organization, company, that you speak and do other events.
Yep.
And that is really growing right now, I think.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun, just kind of taking the reins and having that belief and confidence that I can kind of go out on my own and, share a message of hope and a message of strength and resilience and, just to bring the community together and to help people to recognize that we all have a story. And that's why we're here today, right? To share our stories, the story behind the story.
Yep.
And, I'm thankful for both of you. And I don't know. It's just been an amazing journey, just getting to be part of this organization. As you mentioned, a board member for the Addiction Prevention Coalition, but getting to work alongside you and Art, of course, has just been, it's been a tremendous blessing and an honor just to be part of the mission and vision that you all have for this part of Alabama and really how we've expanded in recent years. I mean, it's just the growth has been exponential, and the road ahead is bright, and I'm just excited to be part of that impact.
I'm glad you're here. So before we get started, I see you have your favorite beverage with you. So tell us about the white monster
drink.
And why is that your favorite?
Let me just get a little sipsy first. Okay, so this is my jam. I should get a sponsorship. We're in the world of NIL right now in sports. How come I don't have my name, image, likeness plastered all over that monster drink? Because let me tell you, that is my pregame go-to. Most people say, as if you need any more energy, any more caffeine.
Yes.
I don't drink coffee. That's not my jam. That's not my thing. But the white monsters, there's just something about the white monster, the way it tastes. I love the carbonation. And it is funny because, yes, it does have caffeine in it. But I will say it's, for me, because I could drink that thing room temperature for 5 hours and I'm good, okay? Wow. It's kind of a weird thing, I know. So I don't feel like I necessarily get, hyped up on it. But we all know we have vices in life, and it's just something with mentally, it just tastes good. It's soothing. It's just a nice little leisurely, I'm going to kick back and podcast with my BFFs. Art and Carrie.
So what's the flavor of it?
I know it's funny because people are like,
it's
white
white.
Monster, like, what does that mean? It's so hard to explain. I'm not even sure what the flavor is. I guess it's sort of berry-ish, but anytime I try to go to a different flavor of Monster, I'm like, it just doesn't do it for me. And then especially you go back to like the other, like some of the other energy drinks, I'm like, woo, it's just something you get used to it. You love it. And
Yep.
it's sugar-free. You know, it's light on the calories. So I feel like it keeps me light on my feet.
One of the reasons we do APC Recovery Cafe, as we've said before, is to share story. And we've got a lot of different stories that we've been able to share. And your connection with APC came through an addiction story, but it wasn't yours. And I have to tell you, it's one of the more painful stories I think I've ever encountered. But honestly, it's probably one of the most bizarre stories of addiction I've ever encountered. So, because you didn't grow up and become a sportscaster in Alabama and then just one day decide to get connected to APC.
Right.
So can you kind of take us back and tell us a little bit about your life growing up and then bring us into the story that has kind of really set you on a different path?
Yeah. You know, it's amazing, I think, when we grow up, especially you have this vision of what life is going to be, right? We kind of have this script written out for ourselves and, you know, the things we admire and the things that, you know, our role models and the people we want to be like when we get older and our aspirations, our goals, our dreams, all those things. And I was one of those kids. I had it all laid out for me. You know, I actually grew up wanting to be a sports doctor, believe it or not a sports broadcaster. So a little different.
Yep.
Sports was always in the family, though. So the Sisler family was always rooted in sports. It was always college football on Saturdays. We, you know, would go to games here and there. We lived just in Roanoke, Virginia, and then eventually moved to Newport, Virginia, just outside of Blacksburg. So Virginia Tech, that was like Hokie country. But it was that, and then, you know, NFL on Sundays, NASCAR races galore. We were always hitting the track, or my brother worked on a pit crew at a local track. So, you know, we were a sports family. We were around it. My brother was a 3-sport athlete. And believe it or not, well, I was a gymnast. And I tell people this all the time. As I'm sitting down, you can't possibly be able to determine my height here, but I am actually 5'9", way too tall to be a gymnast. But it was a sport that I caught on to at a very young age, and I fell in love with it. And I knew that it was something that, well, Olympics aren't within reach, but hey, why don't we consider a college scholarship? So by junior high, I'm like, I mean, it is gymnastics almost every day of the week. I was training 4 to 5 hours a day, commuting over an hour and a half each way to practice every day.
Wow.
So very involved, very dedicated to the sport.
Who came calling from colleges looking?
Yeah, so different schools I looked at and that I really was interested in. North Carolina, NC State was another school I was really interested in. West Virginia University, and actually, believe it or not, Air Force Academy. My SAT scores were like a nub too low, and they wanted to send me to prep school, so that ended up not working out. But the other school was Rutgers, and Rutgers, much like the state of Alabama, which we'll get into that part of my story here momentarily, but like Alabama, Rutgers was never on my radar, right? Like, where's Rutgers at? Does anyone know where Rutgers is at? Yeah, it's in New Jersey, which, oh, by the way, y'all, for the record, we invented college football. So all you Alabama fans out there who think you got all these national championships hanging on your wall.
Well, I will point out you did say y'all before you introduced that. So. So you go to Rutgers and you're competing as a gymnast, and you're a freshman there, right? Mm-hmm. And then you ran into some physical trouble, didn't you? At some point, wasn't there an injury or something?
Yeah, so I'd actually dealt with injuries were kind of my thing. You know, unfortunately, as I mentioned, 5'9", way too tall to be a gymnast. But gymnastics is such a grueling sport on the body. And typically in the sport of gymnastics, you hit your peak around 12 or 13. And then after that, it's like all downhill. Wow. So like the shelf life of a gymnast can be pretty short. And a lot of it has to do with when you peak. Well, for me, obviously, I just kept growing. But, you know, the injuries, I'd been plagued by those even in my recruiting process, which was a hindrance to getting sort of those scholarship looks that I was hoping for. But then even I dealt with back issues my freshman year, fractured femur. I had dealt with a multitude of things. And so it was, you know, it was hard, and it was a bit of a setback, and, you know, frustrating for someone that wants to be out there competing.
Yeah.
But also, you know, I was very much, as a young gymnast and, transitioning into the college ranks, I was always striving for acceptance. And for me, the acceptance came with, wanting my coaches to be accepted by my coaches, to have that praise of like, job well done, and also to make my parents proud. I always wanted to make them proud. And my parents were never like the real pushy parents. Like when I started with those injuries, I will never forget my dad telling me, like sitting me down and saying, Lauren, like if you're ready to hang it up, like this is your decision. You won't upset us or hurt us if you decide to go in a different direction. Because I think for them as parents, it hurt them to see me hurting all the time and dealing with these injuries, broken bones, and my back, of course, being a big one. And they had kind of given me that freedom and said, hey, if you're ready to hang it up, you let us know. We'll support you all the way. So that's something I always appreciate about my parents, of just being that support system and kind of letting me make my own decisions, but also letting me fall. And, I would get into it, like, let's be real, like who didn't go through, you've had teenagers, and I was a nice little teenage brat at times, and would get into it sometimes with my gymnastics coach, and my parents said, look, you have to be respectful. You need to call your coach and have this conversation with your coach. You need to have this conversation and patch things up and work through things. We're not going to fight this battle for you. We'll support you, but they weren't going to pick up the phone and, chew out my coach and be like, well, why are you treating her this way? Because I was the type of gymnast that responded well to kind of that hard, tough love, Get back up there and do it. We got faith in you. We got trust in you. And until you do, you're not walking out of this gym. That was sort of how I was coached, and it worked well for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what I do know about your story and your growing up that you've shared before, it's all the more perplexing about what ends up happening with your mom and dad, because they seem so present and so involved, and so, almost to leave it to Beaver family, really, and involved with everything, worked hard. And so when you get to that place where this crucial event happens, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
It doesn't, no. There's just a lot of pieces, and even now, many years later, trying to piece it all together. And so, I'll take you through sort of the, unfortunately, it ends up being the footnotes version of how everything transpired. And I think you make a good point, because it doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that don't make sense and even have left us now years and years later wondering,
which is very common in addiction with families. No matter who the person is that's struggling with substance use disorder, often we want to caricature them and make them one dimensional. And it's I've never seen it that way with an individual that struggled. Human beings are very complex.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's definitely not one case, one size fits all. And certainly, this was how things sort of transpired with my parents. And so, it was actually February of 2003, my freshman year, and my parents actually came to Rutgers to watch me compete in my competition. And actually, believe it or not, because I'd been dealing with injuries, I had not made the lineup. But in gymnastics, they have these exhibition routines. And so my coaches, because my parents were coming to visit, were like, hey, we'll let Lauren do exhibition routines on bars and floor, because those were really my two best events. And so I remember just going out there and competing on bars. I had a great routine, went out on the floor, and also had a great routine. And, my parents were cheering so loud and just so excited. You could just see how proud they were. Like I had arrived, I'd finally made it here. And was I still dealing with some issues and trying to navigate? Yes, but they were so supportive of that. And so, sadly, that would be the last time that I would see both of my parents. So fast forward to a month later, and I'm studying for exams, and I'd picked up the phone, called my parents. I communicate with my parents every day. Look, I'm the person that my parents literally tucked me in every night until the day I left for college. I remember my mom sometimes, like, I would yell downstairs, hey, Mom, Dad, come tuck me in. And my dad would pretend to be asleep on the couch because he didn't want to get off the couch and come up the stairs. And I would hear my mom, like, hit him and be like, get up. There's going to be a day where, she's not calling you to come up these stairs when she's gone off to college. And so, that was always special for me. They'd come upstairs, tuck me in, we'd say our prayers. And, I kept that closeness with my parents even when I was at Rutgers, 8 hours away from home, and picked up the phone, called my parents, was talking to my mom about my gymnastics, my bar routine. She wanted a play-by-play of everything. She always wanted to know exactly what was happening in practice, whether it was a good day or a bad day. And then she handed off the phone to my dad. Of course, he was dozing off on the couch as usual. And I remember he had just celebrated his 52nd birthday. And he had told me how proud he was of me and just to keep working hard. And, everything seemed fine. And we hung up the phone, said our goodbyes, our love yous. And I remember setting my alarm clock, and I dozed off. And I had, I guess, woke up to the phone ringing on my desk, and it was a landline at the time in my dorm room, and it definitely startled me because it's still dark outside, and it was just after 3 a.m. And so when I looked at the caller ID, it said across it was my home phone number. That's when I knew something was wrong. And so, of course, my heart's racing, and I pick up the phone, and I'm very hesitant, like, what kind of news am I going to get? And my dad had said, Lauren, I need to talk to your brother. And at the time, my brother was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia in the Navy. He was a paratrooper. He was on watch that night. And I guess my dad had been trying to get in touch with him and wasn't able to get through to him. And I think he thought he had the wrong phone number. He's like, can you give me Alan's phone number? And I said, yeah, let me get it. I said, well, what's wrong? And he said, I can't, I just need to talk to your brother. So I actually hung up the phone after I'd given him my brother's phone number. And then within, not even 30 seconds went by that my dad calls me back. And that's when I knew, he didn't get in touch with my brother. Something's wrong. And I finally said, Dad, I said, what is wrong? And he said, Lauren, your mom died. And I said, what? Like, I don't understand. Like, I just talked to my parents. My mom was 45. My dad was 52. And I don't understand. We just talked. Everything seems fine. It's the middle of the night. And he gave me no explanation. He said, Lauren, get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And I believed him. That was the promise he made to me. And, I kind of sat there, kind of curled in a ball, and my roommate was consoling with me. And the crazy part about this is, I'm 18 years old, freshman at Rutgers. I didn't even know how to get a plane ticket. This is kind of back early 2000s where, you make the call, everything's not as accessible. But, oh, by the way, I maybe had $50 to my name sitting in a bank account. I didn't have enough money to buy a plane ticket. And so my roommate had to actually call her mom to get authorization on the credit card to use the credit card to get me a plane ticket. So as you can imagine, this is all happening so fast. It's 3 a.m.
Would you say, in a sense, even as you're describing your dad's demeanor on the calls, there's even some sense that something else is going on with him, even perhaps not just the fact that his wife, your mom, had just died?
Yeah, I think at the time it was, my dad also being in the military. I could tell there was some distress, obviously, in his voice, but it seemed like he was very quick to let's get the pieces in place. Let's get you home. Let's get Alan home, and then we'll figure it out. And so in my mind, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And, as I'm getting the plane, and I didn't even have a car on campus. I had to run down, I had to run downstairs. I had to talk to my other friend who had a car, and he is the one that ended up driving me to the airport along with my roommate. She was there just for support. And, what's crazy is we did live out in rural Virginia. My dad didn't have a cell phone. So in terms of communication, I hung up the phone. There was no communication. He just trusted I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to get home. And I had not touched base with him again. I was not able to reach him at home from the time that I left my dorm room until I got on that plane.
So you have no clue as to what's going on or what happened.
No clue.
All you know is your mother's died.
Not even a guess.
Yeah.
Like nothing in my mind was. Because I'll be honest with you, my mom being 45, my dad 52, my father had dealt with some, heart issues, some cholesterol, some different things, and in my mind, I'd always thought that if something happened to my dad, like maybe a heart attack or something like that. So I always thought maybe in terms of his health, but there was nothing I could place my finger on that would have taken my mom's life. Yeah. Like nothing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, at the age and stage that you were, getting that call and then making those arrangements. I can remember going to college and I'd never written a check before.
That's me. Yeah.
Trying to figure out to pay for my books, So I can't imagine the shock. You're just basically walking through the motions at this point because it just really.
Because I had no guidance, really. Like I said, because my dad was still taking care of things. He had to go take care of stuff at the hospital with my mom, and so again, there was no communication. I did call my brother, and that was really hard having to call him and share that news, you know, because my dad was the one that was trying to get in touch with him and never did. And I guess he ended up picking up the phone. And I mean, I got to tell you, there's a lot of like black holes and things that sort of just like pieces of the story that are kind of like disconnected and disjointed. But I do remember calling him and I just kind of like blurted it out, like, Mom died, you know, and it was just this sort of, okay, you know, I got to get home. And it was almost like you just soldier on, right? I got to get home. And I think for me, a lot of it too was as I'm packing my bags, like the hardest part I remember was I can still see myself like shifting through all the stuff in my closet, this little closet in my dorm room, thinking, what in the world am I going to wear to my mom's funeral? Oh my gosh. Like, and to think, like, I have to make this choice right here and right now. Like, this is crazy. And so, you know, I get on that plane, I get home to Virginia, and mind you, my dad had to go to the hospital and still take care of things. So when I get off that plane, I mean, all I wanted to do was run and jump in my dad's arms. I just knew that he would at least make everything okay. I knew that he would be the one to console me and to help us navigate these next steps without my mom. And so I land, I go through the terminal, I get to the outdoor, you know, parking area where people pull up, and you know, I'm looking around, and Dad's nowhere to be found. And mind you, I still hadn't talked to him. And because he had the landline, I wouldn't be in touch with him anyways, because he would be driving over almost an hour from the house down to the airport to get me. So I just trusted that he was going to be there. Yeah. But instead it was my uncle and my cousin that pulled up. And, you know, my cousin Justin is, you know, someone I'd very much considered a brother to me. And then my uncle, you know, my uncle is you know, married to my aunt, my mom's sister. And when they pull up, again, my immediate reaction and thought process is, Dad's taking care of things. I'm sure we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive home. We're going to go see him, right? We get in the car and we start driving. And I said, I just want to see my dad. And my cousin remembers this vividly as well. When I said that, my uncle turns and looks at him, my cousin sitting in the passenger seat, and then pulls the car over. And he turns around and he looks at me and says, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away too.
Oh, my goodness.
And, I mean, just complete shock. Like, how does this happen, right? You know, you get the call, first it's Mom, and then now it's Dad, and it's crazy when you think back, because I know the question you're going to ask me is, well, did you know? What did you think happened? And when I bring myself back to that moment, I'm sitting in the back of that car. I think you're so flooded with emotions, you don't even have the capacity and ability to even start firing off thoughts and guesses and processing that information. All you know is they're not here.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't have a why.
Right.
And you're not even concerned with the why.
Well, it's so surreal, not just one parent, but both in less than 24 hours.
5 hours.
I mean, no one could compute that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it made no sense. It was, you know, and I think that's one question I've tried to kind of grapple with over the years. How did you not know? How did you not know, like, what was going? You had to have known something. And I think it's our bodies, and I've worked with my therapist a lot on this to understand it, but our bodies have a unique way of helping us to respond to adversity. And I think for me, it really was just everything had closed in on me, and I was in that moment right then and there, and all I cared about was the fact that my parents weren't here. That's all I cared about. I didn't care to know why, how we arrived at this. All I knew was my parents aren't here and they're not coming back.
So did your uncle have any answers for you at that point?
Nothing. Nothing came up, you know, and it's interesting to me because, you know, as I think back to that moment, like, you know, yeah, I want to know what happened, what happened. But I think because of the nature of everything, it was very much like, all right, we're going to get you home. So we actually went over to my grandparents' house, my mom's parents. And then my Auntie Linda, I mentioned before, my mom's sister, they were tight, super close. She was out of town, so she's trying to get in. My brother's, stationed 3.5, 4 hours away. He's trying to get in town. So we're just trying to get everybody, I think, into one place. And I get to my grandparents' house, and, all my girlfriends and my former teammates from gymnastics, I mean, everyone's just flooding in. And so I think then all of a sudden you've got all these people surrounding you. Text messages, phone calls. I say text messages. This was back before text messages were really a thing. But people just sort of flooding in. You didn't really have time to think much about the why. It was more of just like,
you're in shock.
You're
probably.
in shock. Yeah. Like this happened, and the outpouring of support was tremendous. But you're kind of having to tell people over and over and over, parents died, my parents just died. And, I mean, it was just, it's kind of crazy when you go, when I take myself back to that day and just the complete and utter chaos.
That's what I said earlier. I think it's one of the most bizarre stories I've ever heard.
Yeah.
When did you finally find out that there was substance use involved in their deaths?
So, interestingly enough, I went back to school 2 weeks after they died. It was kind of a thing. I sat down with my aunt and uncle, and they said, look, you got to go back to school. I didn't feel like I had much of an option other than to go back to school and to fulfill my commitment, at Rutgers. And I think part of that sort of continued to numb and sort of push out the reasons of what happened, because at Rutgers, my parents weren't there anyway. So it allowed me to continue sort of on this pathway of, living life as a young adult now, and without my parents' involvement. So it allowed me to sort of push out some of the noise and some of the whys. And then I come home that summer, and I think that's kind of when things started to hit me, of realizing like, okay, now reality sets in. My parents didn't have a will, and everything got auctioned off to the estate. So literally within 2 hours, our entire house was literally gutted out, everything thrown in a box, taped up, thrown on the back of a moving truck, and sent off to be auctioned to complete strangers. And so, of course, there's that part of it too, where you think, okay, financially things were obviously in turmoil, but I didn't understand the magnitude of it and couldn't comprehend it. And
really had no clue, right?
No, and looking back, hindsight's 20/20. There were some situations where, my mom had talked about, hey, we might have to sell the house. We might have to move, into an apartment, when you come back home. And a lot of it, I just, I think you put so much emphasis on, like, my parents they're invincible. They're gonna figure it out. Whatever's going on, it's not for me to worry about, because they didn't want me to worry.
Right.
So a lot of conversations that were had behind closed doors were in an effort to protect, I think, myself and my brother. And so when you get to it was essentially the 90-day mark of all of this, is when my aunt and I had to go over to the coroner's office to pick up the toxicology reports. And I wouldn't go in. She pulled up, do you want to come in with me? Nope. So I sat in the passenger seat. She goes in, she comes out, and she's got this manila envelope, and she hands it to me and says, well, do you want to open it up and read it? And I said, nope. And I just threw it in the floorboard and wanted nothing to do with it. And I think at the time, a lot of it was more because of the fear of seeing death written on paper. I didn't want to have to see anything as it pertained to the investigation. I didn't want to see anything that obviously was painful. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see it in writing. And so I think that was the big reason I ignored it. But now, as we're 19 years removed from it, I know I was trying to protect myself, because I think that there was starting to develop some thoughts at this point, 90 days out, of what had happened to my parents. And eventually I need to figure it out. Eventually I need to know. And I think I was afraid to learn the truth.
Yes.
I was afraid to read on that paper that they both overdosed. I was terrified to see that on paper, because if it was on paper, that means it was truthful, it was factual. And my parents could not possibly be addicts. My parents could not possibly have died of overdose. And I felt like that was their legacy was bound in my hands, and it was up to me to protect it. So if I ignored the writing, if I ignored the truth, then it wasn't reality. And if it wasn't reality, then I never had to share that with anybody in truthfulness.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, when you go back, I mean, this is still an issue that we have today. Dealing with the stigma and the shame. I know, as we work with families and parents that are dealing with children that are struggling, it's a topic we're constantly talking about is, the shame and the guilt, even as parents, what did we do? How did we contribute? And also as other people see us. And going back, to when this happened, it's even a bigger issue. So, as a child, I can imagine that you were dealing with, I've got to protect them from this. Yeah. Was that part of the, like, if this is the truth, then, I don't want it to be the truth because I don't want their legacy, their, reputation to be scarred, tarnished with substance use. Yeah. Has that been part of it?
Yeah, because it is all about reputation. I think that it's now clear as day why we as a family didn't know about my parents' addiction. Why did they keep it under wraps? Because they were fighting the shame. Absolutely. They were dealing with the shame. They didn't want people on the outside to know. They were keeping up appearances. They wanted to protect their image and protect their family image and their family name. And so they did everything they could to sweep it under the rug.
To keep it secret.
And so I felt like I inherited that same shame because I knew that it would be, again, striving for acceptance and ultimately that fear of judgment. And I did not want anybody to think differently of my parents because people were so supportive of my parents and just, we were in high school, the house that everyone wanted to come up to. And it wasn't, hey, let's go up in the bedroom and play video games. Like, people wanted to sit and hang out with my parents. Like, we would sit and watch movies and hang out in the living room. And my friends adored my parents. And my parents adored my friends. They were so involved with everything in our lives that, even when we would go to church on Sundays, there was just, you just could not, fathom how this was all going on right in front of us. And, there are several things that now point to the issues that I've now learned in the process, which I know we can get to here in a minute. But
when you finally looked at the report, what was the revelation, or when did you understand what substance they were abusing? How did that come out?
So, believe it or not, I actually never looked at the reports until 10 years later.
Right.
So 10 years was sort of when I had, believe it or not, come here to Alabama. And now I'm going to get emotional. Because even coming here to Alabama, I truly believe that, we have a journey that we go on. And for so many years, I just ran. I ran away from reality. I ran from the truth. And I truly believe, when I came here, all the pieces that aligned up for me to meet you all and to be part of the Addiction Prevention Coalition, and something inside of me said, I want to do something about this. I think inside I was screaming, I was begging to come out of this shame and this shadow of shame that I was feeling. And that's when I realized, maybe I can do something positive with this now. And so it really was at the 7-year mark that I fully understood, or at least accepted, what happened to my parents. I wasn't super vocal about it out of the gates, but really kind of how it all transpired over the years after my parents passed. I threw that manila envelope on the floor, wouldn't acknowledge it. I would tell people, oh, mom died of respiratory failure, dad died of a heart attack. Sounds a lot better than overdose, right? Well, mom did die of respiratory failure because she ingested a lethal amount of fentanyl. My dad died of respiratory failure, but in my mind, his heart stopped. So you can justify that as a heart attack, right? And so...
Well, from ingesting the same substance.
From ingesting the same substance.
Right.
And so, what ultimately had happened is my parents were going to a pain management doctor. My mom had been prescribed OxyContin, my father as well. Well, eventually my mom couldn't manage her pain with the OxyContin. She knew she was starting to get, addicted to it from what I am gathering, just based on some different documents and things I've found from her doctors and some journaling that she did. And so then she was put on fentanyl because it's a time-release pain patch. My father was still on Oxycontin, and they were going to the same pain management doctor for 3+ years. And my mom had degenerative disc disease. She was dealing with a lot of those ailments and the surgeries and trying to maintain all that. And then my dad had chronic back pain. But my dad also suffered with some PTSD from his service in the Navy. And actually, my dad was an alcoholic. And growing up, I knew my dad was an alcoholic, but I didn't understand that term.
Yeah.
Like alcoholism to me, like the term meant nothing to me. I didn't know it.
Because he was still high functioning.
Very high functioning.
Right.
Went to work all the time. The only time it became a problem was when he would decide to go on a bender on the weekend, and then maybe he'd call out of work on a Monday, and my mom would give him you need to go back to your AA meetings. I didn't know what that was. I just would hear in the background these conversations, and my dad's personality would change when he would drink. So I knew when he was drinking, and I knew that it was an issue, and his spending would tend to increase when he was drinking. And then it was kind of the ultimatum. But I compartmentalized that. To me, it was like, oh, box it up, put it on the shelf. Oh, 6 months, my dad's great. Like these are the memories I'm holding on to. These are the things I'm concerned with. Those relapses didn't resonate with me the same because I was able to just box them up and put them on a shelf. Everything's fine now, right? So that was always my focus. But I had no idea that my parents were abusing their prescription drugs. A couple things led me to think about there would be an argument. Mom would accuse my dad of taking her medication, and she would get really angry. I mean, one time this just knockout, and I've never seen my mom so angry before, and I was like, whoa, like this doesn't make sense. And I just, in my mind, I guess I could not comprehend like why my mom was so mad. And then my dad was so apologetic and this and that, and then nothing. Like then we moved on. We moved on past it. And it was just something I never thought about again, right? And so it was just those little tiny things. And in my mind, I say tiny. They were obviously very big, red flags. But when you're not educating, you don't understand it. And your parents do such a good job of putting that on the shelf and saying, we're good, we're fine, right? Mm-hmm. So, the story just continues. There's so many layers to it. At Thanksgiving, when I was home from school at Rutgers, it was me and my cousin was there, my cousin Justin, and my brother was home from the Navy. And I wake up to my mom screaming, call 911. And we all run downstairs, and my dad is blue as can be on the couch. My brother pulls him off the couch, rolls him over, got a wooden spoon, knew to flip the spoon. He got his airways open. And I call 911 because my mom is hysterical. She can't get her, wits about her. Everything's just falling apart. So I call 911. And they get there and they take my dad to the hospital. And come to find out, my dad was near death from an overdose. But what we were told, Dad had a bad reaction to medication. Sounds way different. So I went back to Rutgers with the idea that my dad, his medication mix, probably his cholesterol and his heart medicine, and bad situation. No, my dad ended up overdosing. Goes to St. Albans, which is a psychiatric hospital. I guess that was a 5-day evaluation period. I guess when you overdose in the state of Virginia, that was sort of the common way they handled things. But I didn't really understand or know about that. And what I later found out was that my dad goes back to his pain management doctor 3 weeks after overdosing and gets another 90-day supply of Oxycontin. Explain that to me.
Yeah.
And so it's just this. I mean, but these are things that I'm learning 19 years later.
Right.
I'm working on a book right now.
And they're actually very common with other, even though not common that you would lose two parents within 5 hours, but the dynamic you're talking about repeats itself over and over and again in families where somebody is secretly using and is somebody secretly being supplied. And I think in the last decade, we're catching up to the fact that we had to totally go back and retrain doctors and dentists and professionals about the addictive nature of these opiates.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how it's just under the surface in this country.
Yeah.
So as bizarre as your story is, there's a lot of commonality to it that we're just now discovering.
Yeah. And I think this process of I'm working on a book right now, And I think that has really challenged and charged me with maybe understanding more of what's going on right now, like what's going on behind closed doors, what's going on behind the scenes, and plugging in some of those black holes that were sort of just left to be for so many years. And now it's been this, I'm a lot's bubbling to the surface. It's been emotional, but it's also been so healing in many ways. And I'm like, man, and you ask that question, if only I knew, if only I knew. And I think that's, I get emotional here, and I think about the work that we're doing at the APC and the work that you guys have just had your arms wrapped around, at the Addiction Prevention Coalition, and the work you do with the PAL groups, and just, better understanding addiction. You've lived it, right? You've lived it, obviously, on both sides with yourself as an individual, but your children, and just the importance of that education. And, while obviously I'd love to turn back the hands of time, in working with my therapist, I've come to this revelation, like I could never have saved my parents' life. It's not up to me. And that's something I hope to encourage people, that, I think we inherit this shame and this idea that it's, that we could do something.
If only I'd done something differently. Yeah, we've replayed that over and over again.
And it's not my job. I can't save your life. I can't save your life. I couldn't save their life.
But one of the more important things it seems that's come out of your journey is that over time, as you've pieced things together and you've done your own work, then part of your healing now is not only telling your story, but encouraging other people to begin to talk about this in a more open way.
So talk just a little bit more as we wrap up about what you do. I mean, like when you're going out and speaking. So talk a little bit about that, and also talk a little bit about the scholarship fund that you're working on, because I know that's something you're excited about.
Yes. So just from the speaking, standpoint, going out and sharing that message, I've had the opportunity to go speak to different schools, athletic programs, and really it's just kind of sharing my story and, kind of tailoring it towards, like you said, substance abuse, of course, being one of them, substance misuse, but also, the identity. We all, fighting this identity crisis, especially in this new age of social media, and we've got to be good enough and we've got to be better. And we're just, we're always fighting for that comparison game. How can we be better? How can we be better than this next person? And really trying to get to these students and to these young adults, to help them to overcome some of that. And then even in the corporate world, I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of different corporations and businesses, and, just helping people to see that we all have a story. How are you gonna, use your story to create authentic connections, and to use that as, a resource for you moving forward, right? And owning your story. And that's what I always say, fall in love with your story. And then, from there, the scholarship fund is something I'm really excited about, and, something that you, Carrie, have inspired me to go after. And I still, putting the pieces together, trying to figure out what it looks like. I know, it's something that's personal and dear to me, is that I don't want people to be defined by their circumstances, right? And I think we have so many students and kids that maybe come from a difficult situation at home, and, maybe it's, mom or dad's been, in and out of rehab, and maybe dad's incarcerated or mom's incarcerated because of, drugs, and whatever it is, that I think a lot of times we fall trapped to that. And for me, when I was coming up out of college, going to job interviews, my biggest fear was what people would think if they knew my parents died of overdose. Well, maybe she's going to fall into those same addictive behaviors, or maybe she's not qualified for this because her parents are drug addicts. And, what kind of family does she come from, right? Because I feel like we put labels on everything. Yes. And so my goal with this, this scholarship fund that, I've named after my parents, the Sislers, my goal was just to really help, people kind of remove that label, being defined by their circumstances, and to step out of that and say, you know what, maybe this is happening at home, but I can overcome that. I can go to school. I can get an education, and I can use my experiences at home to help people, but then also to have love in my heart for those that are struggling. Yep. Right? Because I think that's important too. I love my parents more than ever. And it hurts that they're not here. When I stand out on that football field and that national anthem is playing, I always look up in the sky and I say my prayers, and I'm always talking to mom and dad and, you know, wish you were here, but I know they got the best seat in the house. And, you know, I just think how much love I have for them despite some of the you know, issues and circumstances that ultimately took their lives.
Well, I mean, huge thank you. I mean, it seems small for all that you do for APC. You know, Lauren is, so many of the schools will call and say, hey, is there anybody that could speak to a whole assembly of students and actually keep their attention?
And do a cartwheel at the same time.
Yeah, right? Oh, yeah, let me tell you, you sometimes talking to an entire assembly and keeping their attention can be very difficult, but you know, I always try to reel them in.
You love
and I love
that.
it. Yes. And
the pictures that come back from those assemblies, I mean, she's hugging on students. She looks like a student. You know, you try to have to pick her out of the crowd,
right.
but she's always been.
I have some beauty secrets. I'll let y'all in on. You just shoot me some DMs. I got y'all.
But your heart for the topic, your heart for people in recovery, but especially your heart for students is so evident, and they know it. That's one of the reasons that we love to, you know, connect you with schools, is because the kids, you can't fool the kids. The kids know, you know, who really cares, and you're one of those people. So thank you for doing that.
And we need to have you back when the book is finished, right? So we can preview that.
Well, and then there's a story that we didn't get time to tell about the policeman.
Yes.
Oh yeah, we got to do that
We
for
have
sure.
to come back.
Yeah, so y'all, this will be a cliffhanger, and that'll be a good one for when we promote the book, because that's a huge story that will be a theme in the book that just shows you that even 19 years later, we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary in March of my parents passing, and there's always healing and there's always connection. And I think that's one thing I do want to encourage people. If you're going through stuff, that I think we try to put a timeline on things. Y'all, it's been 19 years and I'm still healing. I'm still finding out things. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. And so, you know, I think
I had a friend in recovery used to say, you got to tell your story 5,874 times before you're healed.
Yeah.
Of course, he was being kidding in one sense about the number.
Yeah.
But I do think the more we keep telling our story, the more we're healing, and the more we are inviting other people into healing as well. And if people think that the story that Lauren shared about her parents' death is bizarre, and of course it is, that story of hope that you're going to share when you come back about the policeman, that is really bizarre, but it is really beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful. I think that's a good place to close.
Yes.
And so thanks everybody for joining us on this edition of APC Recovery Cafe, and we'll see you next time.
One of the things that APC is known for is being a connector, because we're stronger together.
Not only are we there for those who are suffering through substance use disorder, but we're there for family members, and we really take our job seriously.
We all have personal reason why we're in this field. We're changing people's lives one community at a time.